Good morning, everybody. It's just after 9 a.m. and we are going to begin this discussion on walking alongside communities through tragedy, and really important conversation, especially given what many of our panelists have dealt with here in South Florida. My name is Manuel Bojorquez. I'm the CBS News national correspondent based here in Miami. We are honored to have with us this morning Mayor Daniela Levine Cava, who's the first woman elected to the office and has led this community through several crises, including what's happened in Surfside, but as well as the pandemic and going all the way back to Hurricane Andrew. Also with us this morning, Bianca Padro Ocasio, a reporter with the Miami Herald, who has covered the 2020 election, which is the gift that just keeps on giving, especially focusing on the changing demographics in the Hispanic community, and Romina Ruiz Goiriena, I hope I got that right, who's the National Housing and Social Services reporter for USA Today, who has covered everything from immigration to organized crime. So thank you all of us for joining us this morning. Mayor, I know your time is limited, very busy schedule. I'd like to get started with you on how you're doing and how you deal with leading a community through these types of crises, which you've been commended for your leadership.
Well, thank you so very much, and thank you for including me. I wanted to be part of this discussion because I get to look in the faces of the reporters covering this tragedy each and every day, and I feel very connected to all of you who've been on site. And I also, in general, am very appreciative of the work of media in covering the important news. We can't do our work in public policy and community response without the active engagement of a free press. And I'm very appreciative, supportive of that my entire life. In fact, I started in high school as a features editor for our newspaper, I will just say, and have always been a big supporter. And so I feel more connected than ever because of this tragedy. And I think that the work of the press in covering this incident has really been a critical part of what has brought the world into this shared space of compassion. So how am I doing? I feel uplifted by the support that we are receiving from around the world, from this community. It's a very unifying experience to be in the midst of this terrible, unprecedented tragedy. And so, obviously it's very sad and it's very demanding, but at the same time, it's something that is uplifting and makes me feel very proud to be part of the incredible response.
Well, we've seen you every day before the cameras giving those difficult updates and dealing with it yourself. What we haven't seen is the other side of this, which is you've been meeting with these families privately, and that's just got to be another form of heartbreak. What's your message when it comes to journalists and officials, I guess we can say in this capacity, on keeping the focus on those families? I mean, we're talking about trauma that journalists and people deal with. But one of the ways I think that I've dealt with this is to always put it into the perspective of, I have nothing to complain about. These long hours are nothing compared to what these families are going through.
Yeah, I think that's very, very wise. I think that tragedy does help us understand what's truly important, and reaching out to people we love, and making sure to take that time to let people know that we love and appreciate them. I also think that we could get very technical about this, and clearly we want to understand technically what happened here and do everything possible to avoid these kinds of tragedies in the future. But at the center is the motivation to really do something about this comes from the fact that these are people like ourselves, but for the grace of God, could be any of us. And in fact, that particular building is kind of like a United Nations. There were so many people from so many countries, so many different walks of life, and truly the fact for those of us here in Miami-Dade, we all know people in that building or know people who know people. It's like truly like 1 or 2 degrees of separation. And I know dozens and dozens of people who've been in communication with me about their loved ones in that building personally, people I've already known. And then those that I'm meeting, now I feel like we're family because it's been such this passage. It's been a real passage together from the moment of the falling to the dealing with the basics of getting people the basics and all the way through these various stages and going through the stages of grief together as well.
And I think this story exposed people on a national level to what we know very well here in Miami-Dade County, which is bilingualism, and the fact that those updates were immediately translated for people, and that people were listening in other countries, people in Argentina that were looking for updates on their loved ones. I think that goes a long way as well.
Yeah, and I just want to mention as well, in terms of how I'm doing, I've attended a few of the funerals, and personally, for me, that has been very important for me as well to have closure. And you as reporters will interview and maybe get to some details with a family. I've been kind of dealing with it in the collective. So making sure that there is a family assistance center, making sure that insurance issues can be resolved, making sure that the medical examiner's office can have the tools it needs to get rapid information to families and so on. So I really haven't had as much time to be one-on-one with families. And also, of course, I'm there for them, and I've gotten to know some of them and embrace them, but really I'm not the person that's solving their problems, right? They want to know granularly how things are going to get done. But being at the funerals with the families gives me closure.
Thank you for sharing that. I know your time is limited, busy schedule. I do want to open it up to Bianca and Romina in case there's anything they'd like to share while we have you here or any questions they might have for you.
Could I just say one other thing? I just want to say that, I believe that compassion is a core part of government, and that has been not the norm. And I do think that this whole of government and compassionate response has been a unique factor. And we bring the media into that circle of compassion. And to me, like when I had a number of reporters express their gratitude for being able to go with us for a moment of silence at the site, that was so important to them. That really was very important to me, that we were able to offer that we and that we could be human beings together on the site of a tragedy that we have shared day after day.
Well, we thank you for that. Bianca, Romina, anything with the mayor that you'd like to discuss?
Yes, I would like to ask a quick question, and thank you, Mayor, so much for joining this panel. And I've seen you every day at the briefings for as long as we've had them. And I think that, it's very clear, obviously, the compassion and the genuine, solidarity that you've felt with a lot of the families. I guess I just wanted to understand a little bit about how the decisions were happening behind the scenes about, letting in media into the scene of the collapse. Because sometimes we were getting information from a lot of politicians that were able to kind of visit the collapse almost on a daily basis at the beginning. But I just want to understand, why, that decision was made, not necessarily to have media as close to the collapse, especially in the very beginning. I know that later on they did do a tour.
So this site obviously was bringing out at the beginning bodies, now later remains, and those images can be very, very jarring. I will also say that politicians are not, if I could have restricted politicians from the site more so, I would have, because it unfortunately is not a situation where we just wanted to be extremely respectful for the families and as well for the first responders on the scene, and not make a spectacle of it.
I think I think everybody understands that as much as everybody wanted to get the story. You know, I think there's that certain degree of respect that we all have as human beings for what was going on there. Um, any other questions for the mayor? Romy, anything you'd like to ask?
Well, thank you so much, Mayor, for joining us. You know, it's not lost on me that this is a panel of majority women, that you are, you know, the first woman in this position of leadership, and that this at the same time is a it's a tragedy that hits home for all four of us, right? Like, we're covering this, but this is our hometown in many ways. I was going to ask you, in that position of leadership, as you're dealing with the, you know, the emotional challenges, how's your staff doing? How are all the other people around you that we don't see? And do you feel particularly burdened or an expectation to lead and to exercise some sort of empathy, or to close off, or, you know, like, what do people expect from you sort of at this time in those spaces?
From what I understand, it's very different having me be in this role from the former men who have been in this role. And I think that it has been helpful for my command staff and those that are supporting us to know that we really are mindful of how they're feeling in all of this, and to take care of themselves. And they have been working feverishly. And we've tried to do some switching out and make sure that there's quite a lot of on-site mental health support, and we're amplifying it for the future. But I just think that it's been a very, the open communication that we've had with media is mirrored in our how we've handled the crisis inside government and across jurisdictions. So very open and frequent communication, very collaborative, very seeking input, you know, even though we have to, you know, a command structure, always getting the support and the maximum input possible. So I think those are some of the ways that, and we hope that this will be a model for going forward in a more inclusive, collaborative, and compassionate approach to handling emergencies.
And just one last thing from me is, any aspiring journalists who are listening to us right now, can you just stress the importance of taking care of their mental health, given the things that they might be seeing or dealing with in the future?
Yeah, thank you for that. And honestly, I've seen many of the reporters crying during these briefings, and I know that they feel it very, very deeply. And yeah, I mean, look, these comfort dogs are here for a reason, and they're available to the press as well. And they are definitely helpful. But we also have very extensive mental health services, and I would really encourage you to talk with your networks and make sure that they understand, and giving you the space and the time to recover. I know I've seen some of the journalists here covering this rushing off to another emergency and coming rushing back. I'm sure that that is extremely stressful, and you know, everybody needs some time to decompress.
Absolutely. I've got our own rescue mutt here at home, who's kind of become my therapy when I get home, wants to do nothing but play. Mayor, thank you for your time. Like I said, I know it's limited. If you'd like to hang out, you're welcome to. And if you need to go, we understand.
Unfortunately, I have to go do a briefing, but I really am grateful for being allowed to participate, and look forward to working with all of you in the future.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Yep. Yeah, and you've done an extraordinary job. I mean, truly, the coverage of this has been, as you say, it's global, it's international, and it's uniformly compassionate, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership and for your time this morning. Ciao.
Thank you.
All right, Bianca and Romy, it's back to us now. I know that we are going to open it up for questions a little bit later on, but when we're talking about tragedies and how, as journalists, you deal with it, I'd like to open it up to you two to maybe give us some examples of things that you've covered. It could be Surfside, it could be other things. And everybody keeps saying, you know, it takes a toll, it takes a toll. How do you deal with this? What would you guys like to add about that?
I don't know if you want to go first,
No,
Bianca.
go ahead.
Eh,
I'm warming up, so.
yeah, okay. So, you know, I would love to tell you that Surfside was the first tragedy that I've covered, and it's absolutely not. I started my career in Israel. So I've, you know, done, as you said, you know, from drug wars to earthquakes to all of these things. And, you know, they say that youth is wasted in the young, and the hubris of youth was particularly that I was like, I can take this, I can deal with this, I feel nothing. And, you know, I do understand that, like, when you're working in those first couple of hours, say with Surfside, like, you are operating like a trauma surgeon. Like, there is a part of you that needs to sort of like suspend. You need to be so aware of what is going on around you and so present for the people that you're interviewing. Like, you definitely have like an emotional register that you're using in order to interview people, to gain their trust, for them to, you know, they're talking to you on the worst day of their lives. I think the thing that helps me is to remind myself that they are talking to me on the worst day of their lives. Like, they're the subject and I'm just an object, right? And then, you know, it takes a while to decompress and all of these things, but to basically, I do have a support structure, right? I do have, you know, editors and, you know, my posse, right? Like the tribe of journalist women that support me, and also those people in my personal life. And, you know, I would get home from Surfside, even if it was like 11 p.m. and I would meditate in the shower, like literally like turn on a hot shower, and like, it's only going to be 10 minutes before I sleep for 3 hours and then I'm back. But like, to take those moments, right? I always eat. I'm like the person who's always telling people, like, here's a tuna can, here's a thing. Like, I'm like the person who will Uber you food as we're doing all these things, like super important. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, like literally HALT is like my sort of guiding light. So if those are sort of practical and stuff, but take the time, definitely take the time.
It's interesting, you talked about making people eat. Nobody needs to be a hero. The work is hard enough. Like, don't make it harder on yourself. If somebody offers you a break or food or something, remember that you're a human being that needs that as well.
I'm also Jewish, so I am like very on this, you know, like everyone needs to eat at all times. I like Jewish mother everyone at all times. So like, yeah.
Well, I hope to see you on my next assignment if that's the case. Thank you for sharing that. Bianca, anything from you?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, Romina, you were talking about meditating in the shower, and it's just so interesting because I didn't really think about the daily, you know, routine that you really have to make for yourself to really get through this job sometimes. And until the pandemic, I think that coverage and, you know, just the length of it, the fact that, you know, nobody knew when it was going to end, and the uncertainty of it really forced me to, you know, get hobbies, to, you know, create boundaries with my job, decide when for myself it was enough. And I think that's something that has been really important and has guided me through this Surfside coverage, because obviously the nature of it is just so different to anything I've ever experienced. And I don't think that anyone really prepares you for this sort of situation. I think that now there's a little more consciousness and awareness about, you know, how reporters need to get through, you know, mass shootings and the aftermath of mass shootings. But this sort of situation is really, you know, it just felt so different to anything I've ever done. And I think, you know, I was kind of on automatic trying to figure out how to cover this massive situation that I didn't really comprehend on the very first day. I didn't understand, you know, how to even talk to people about their loved ones. Do we talk about them in the present? Do we talk about them in the past? I mean, I didn't understand what was happening, and neither did the family. So in a way, it was kind of, we're both on the same level in that sense, where we're trying to figure out, okay, you know, where do you get information? Where do you, you know, who is supposed to tell you where your loved one is? How long is it going to be until you get, you know, any news about what's happening? And I think that, you know, I don't want to say that, you know, I I went through, what the families went through, but I do think that there was some sort of understanding between the families and the reporters about, we're just trying to get information about what's happening. So, I do think that creating boundaries, that there were some times that, I would go through my whole shift without eating 9 hours and I never felt a thing. And, that is concerning. Like maybe in the moment it's like, oh yeah, I can go, like I can keep going and I can keep sending feeds and I can just, get through this without drinking a drop of water and eating. But it really takes a toll after, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days of covering this tragedy. And I remember the first day I didn't have anything to eat, and one of my colleagues sent me a box of pizza, and it was the best box of pizza I've ever had in my life. And I just, it's these very small things that that really matter and are really the biggest things that will get you through these situations that we don't necessarily think about when we're kind of on overdrive.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I will say that, a lot of the companies we work for do have mental health services that we can reach out to if we need. You mentioned the help of colleagues, and I have found it helpful to just not, again, try to be the hero, not to be so tough, stiff upper lip about it. And if you really are feeling something you want to get off your chest, you have a group of people there that you can do that with, a producer or photographer or whoever it is. I found that after covering the police shootings in Dallas several years ago, where I lived just down the block from where it happened, and I was there running out to cover it as police were still trying to apprehend the suspect, and there were still shots being fired, that anything where there was a crowd of people or a police car or sirens, it could be a parade, but it would bring me back to that moment, and it kind of stirred up, some frightening flashbacks for me. And something as simple as reaching out to the person I'm with and saying, "Oh my God, this is bringing back some bad memories," helped. Just talking about it helps, and I think that's really important for everybody. It's something that even as seasoned journalists, I think we're all learning to process. Are you finding that too? That as you go, you learn more about how to deal with it?
I just wanted to add real quickly to that. I've experienced something similar because I live very close to the Surfside collapse site, and I hear sirens all the time. I mean, I'm still hearing them every day, all the time, even if I take a day off, and there's no really escaping what's going on for me. And that has been really difficult. I mean, sometimes I would go get some coffee, or I'm walking across the street to get some lunch, and then there's 10 trucks carrying off debris right in front of me. And it's just, there is something really, especially painful about covering a tragedy in your community, in your neighborhood, because you can't just pop in and then leave with all your crew and all your cameras. You have to stay here. And there's a lot of rewarding things about that, right? We talk about being able to follow up with families, being able to really cover how their lives change because of this tragedy and the impact that causes. But it takes such a deep toll, and like you're saying, the sound of the sirens and escaping from that is very difficult. I've had so many nightmares about collapses in the past several weeks, and I'm sure a lot of us have. And it's just I think trying to take advantage of the small moments I think has been helpful. But like I said, I think the pandemic for me was really important, because that's when I really developed some tools, like, taking up hobbies. Like now I'm a really big plant person. I love plants and indoor gardening. I took up surfing this year, which has been really great. And people think you can't surf in South Florida, but you can. So, it's kind of finding not glorifying journalism as an identity, but really finding what makes you a person and what makes you whole, and really digging into those things. What are the things that make you happy? I had a journalist reach out to me during the tragedy, and she sent me this lovely message where she said, you just take pleasure in the small things, like smelling mangoes and, touching, just fabrics that make you happy. And those sound like really kind of silly things, but they really kind of ground you.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds to me, I always say I focus back on the victims when I feel like I'm having a difficult moment, and that might not be the healthiest thing to do to displace it. But, then I'll cry watching a Hallmark commercial at home. Like it'll come out somehow, right? But it sounds to me like both of you, Romy and Bianca, have taken it upon yourselves to build a support system or ahead of a tragedy, right? Like you guys have figured out, whether it's meditation or whether it's the hobbies, a way to give yourselves that release. Is it just something that you were probably building before this collapse happened? And I think it's really important to point that out, that you guys were working on this.
Yeah, just to sort of quickly circle back, about that mental health thing. And I think this is that you're sort of keying on it, Manny. Most of the time, when you're doing the work, you're not going to feel it the first month or so of the story. You're so invested. I would tell you that like one of the biggest things is work for people that are going to advocate for you in spite of yourself. I'm the person that's always going to be like, no, I'm not taking a day. I had at least 20 people at USA Today ask me to take a day off. And I was like, no, I got it. I'm good. Like you have to work for people that are like, no, go home. But also that you're going to feel these things. Just to give you an idea, as we're sort of following what's happening in Cuba, I lived in Cuba in 2009 and 2000 and all the way through 2010 and covered a hunger strike and covered, the ladies in white at that moment. And I have found myself, just to be super honest, almost incapable of following what's going on in Cuba incrementally, because it takes me back to those feelings from 10 years ago. It's like, you want to talk to me about Surfside today? I'm great. But and that's when I notice, the toll. And it's been 11 years or something like that. It's been a long time. And that's how you realize that, you're also a human being and you're a work in progress. And and progress isn't linear. But to your point, yes, absolutely. I am a ninja about my mental health, literally a ninja. And if I'm not taking care of me, nobody can take care of me, right? And I have a whole like buttload of tricks. I inventory at night. I like do quick gratitude things. I am like, I don't look like the poster child of Eat, Pray, Love because I'm way too sardonic, but like on the inside, I'm like, un corazón de pollo. I'm like totally doing all of those things on the side. But I super encourage people to build those things. We need them. Like we do too, like our work is hard enough, and when we don't, I think the people whom we love suffer because we're less available. We are less human. We are, and for us to be able to really also take in and experience the joys, of the things that we do. And I can't tell you that I'm always a happy person. That has never been my goal, but I do believe that I live a very meaningful life, and that my work is meaningful, and that my life is meaningful, and that the emotions sort of like flow in and out. And if I learn to sort of detach from those experiences, it tends to be really fulfilling.
Thanks for sharing that. We do have a question from one of the people who is listening in on the panel. Jennifer Marcial, question for Romina and Bianca. How has covering this situation been different from covering other tragedies such as hurricanes and earthquakes and situations like Pulse, for example? How do you work and keep your mental sanity while providing quality content?
Well, hi, Jenny. It's so good to have you here. I was not in Orlando when Pulse happened, but I was in Orlando when Hurricane Maria happened, and that was very difficult personally because I'm Puerto Rican, my whole family's in Puerto Rico, and seeing it from afar, I can kind of get a glimpse of what, you know, a lot of Cubans are feeling right now who have family on the island, because it's very difficult to see tragedy happen in your home and you're not there. I think that for me, if I were to compare Surfside to anything, it would probably be more to a hurricane, and that doesn't even compare. But I think that the way they are similar is the length of the tragedy, the fact that it takes so long for you to really put the pieces together and understand the magnitude of the damage and the impact on the people you're covering. And that you can come back years later and continue to find stories and things that were never really reported. But you know, but this particular situation has been unlike anything I've ever experienced, because I've had to really pull strength in the immediate to really employ empathy in a way that I could really parse out when I was doing other stories. So for example, in the very first day, and I'm sure Romina experienced this, as did a lot of other reporters, we were at what was the Family Reunification Center, where a lot of families went to when the building collapsed to basically find their family members. And nobody understood really what was happening. They thought maybe their family members had been taken to a hospital. Maybe, they got to rent out, and maybe they left their cell phone. So that's why I can't communicate. But, this is a situation where there were practically no survivors in the part of the building that collapsed. And, I keep going back to, people who were telling me, can you just show the picture of my husband because maybe he's in a hospital? Can you just, spread the word in case this person just left, and that's why I can't communicate with them. And that just never happened. And I think that, having to ask questions that could give people information about what was happening, but also understanding that this moment of uncertainty for these people was, just full of so much anguish. That was very difficult. And I don't really think that any of us can prepare for that. I think that I was just going on, with the professional tools that I come to this job with, trying to give as much information as possible and all that stuff. But I don't think that there was any magic to it. I think I just tried to be as human as possible and, give people voice if they wanted it. At one point, a lot of people brought photos of their family members and said, this person is missing. And obviously they wanted to speak. So, that is your job. You have to be that conduit for your community when they want to speak up. And a lot of people don't want to speak up. A lot of people don't even want their names in the newspaper. So, really understanding how to tell the story in the best way while managing all of those emotions it's hard. I don't think I have an answer to that.
Well, I think what was different about this is a hurricane, and these are all tragedies, and the loss of life is the greatest tragedy of all. But a hurricane, you have a sense that it's coming. A war zone, unfortunately, you know what you're walking into and the kind of coverage that you're going to do. But this was so out of the blue and horrific that in the middle of the night, people could just be taken away like that. I think that was felt so different about this situation. And I can tell you from just getting to the scene early that morning, that in my brain, I kept saying, well, this is hopefully just snowbirds, that these are empty condos and the people have left for the summer. And interviewing the mayor of Surfside, he said, no, these are families. And you tried at that moment to say, well, maybe there weren't that many people in there. And then it just kind of revealed itself more and more and more. And that's what's been really difficult, is that it has been bruising day after day after day after day to cover. And I can only imagine for those families. Go ahead.
I was going to say that I think for me, earthquakes also happen out of the blue. True. Right? You don't really expect them. And I've covered a couple, quite a few of those. And I also lived in Israel. So, suicide bombings occur, right? And so one day you're moving, or, you know, a Katyusha lands 5 kilometers from where you live, which was what happened to me. And I think the thing though that was really, really eerie, and I didn't know it early on, but it became very evident 48 hours after, a week after, and it was chronicled, I think, best by the Miami Herald's Linda Robertson. Like, everybody in this building knew somebody. Everybody in Miami knew somebody in this building. And for me, what was really, what had never happened, you know, as somebody who is, you know, a third generation of immigrants, right? From countries, like my parents are both from different countries, and their parents were from different countries and lived and all emigrated to another country, right? I have this like perennial like Jewish experience, was to basically walk into that community center and hear Spanish and Hebrew, you know, like it looked like a community center, like the one that I would go to in Caracas. Like it looked, people sounded, looked, they were at the intersection of all these places. And it really felt like, in a very weird way, like the meeting point of everything I had ever covered. And at the same point, the meeting point of generations of my family. And what started to happen 48 hours, you know, was, you know, we did this TikTok piece, and I had to give it to my colleague Rick Jervis, who was also originally from Miami, because I was like, oh my God, my dad's telling me that that woman who survived was my high school, my uncle's high school girlfriend. Or I had to talk to Sita from the Miami Herald when I saw her first chronicle about the claimants, and being like, oh my God, like in Cuba, like our families, you know, like finding that there were almost like these weird connections to people in the building. That has never happened to me in a story to this degree, you know. And I think that like that's what sort of made it challenging, right? And so it's like, when am I a human that's being kind of affected as a member of this community, or as like a member of multiple communities in the world? Or when am I a journalist about this? And like, what is the ethical thing that I need to do as a human or as a reporter right now?
Exactly. Well, and you always put yourself in the position of these victims. I always think, God, what if that was my family? How would I be feeling, you know? And it's so terrible to think about. Want to get through some other questions from folks. Angela Serrano Roman, how do you evaluate national coverage of this tragedy compared to local and community media? And in what areas do these national newsrooms, if anything, need to improve?
Well, I'm local media. I know Romina is national media, although she lives in the community. So I guess that's a little distinction. But you know, I will say that I think national media has a function, right? I mean, I think that they serve a purpose to tell the story to a wider audience, to tell the world what has happened here. And we tell the story for our community. We tell the story for the people who live here. So for example, national media can say, you know, oh, this tragedy in Miami. We have to say this tragedy in Surfside. You know, there's this heightened sense of identity and location that we really have to convey, right? But I think generally speaking, one of the most frustrating things I lived through, and I've covered other tragedies from a local perspective that have had national interest. And, you know, it's this parachuting situation that I don't know. I think just editors need to reconsider how this is done, because sometimes it is creating more harm for newsrooms that are already strapped for resources. And, you know, there's all this, you know, kind of, you know, talking about how local newsrooms, like, we have to support, you need to subscribe. And then when it comes down to it, when it comes to the news, you know, I got so many requests from national reporters saying, can you give me the contact information for this family? Can you find a survivor for me? Can you find, you know, somebody who can talk, you know, somebody who survived but was in the unit but maybe escaped? I mean, these ridiculous requests that I was like, I don't work for you. You're not paying me to do this work. But also, you know, I understand that they have a role, but we are not here for that. We're not here to support the national media. We're here to tell the story for our community from our perspective. And, you know, when you consider what the Miami Herald has done with this story, the fact that we have done obituaries for every single victim that has been identified so far, that is a humongous task for the staff that we have. And I just think it's offensive. And I think that, there just needs to be a conversation really about the way that national media parachutes into situations and how to do it, with more consideration for the people who are also hurting. Like Romina said, she has so many connections to this building. There are so many people here who are hurting. I know that happened in Orlando with Pulse. A lot of reporters that had friends and knew people who were affected by that tragedy. So it's just common sense. And I think empathy and compassion are employable skills, and I think that a lot of people don't have them. So if you are able to really approach this job with those skills, I think that you will probably get very far, and you will make a lot of friends. So that is just my speech and what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything that Bianca's saying. Full disclosure, I moved on to Gannett from the Miami Herald, so I'm not gonna not plug local news. If you look at the national outlets that are doing what you think is really good coverage, you will find a reporter in a byline that has deep connections. It's not lost on me that Patty Mazzei at the New York Times was a Miami Herald reporter for a long time. Like if you look at what people are doing, CBS is covered, like it's people that have deep ties, and they're usually the reporters that are leading. I understand that, you're trying to cover a disaster and sort of elevate that conversation and so you deploy, newsrooms tend to deploy a ton of people, but in those, in those gaggles, in those stand-ups of 10, 15 people, when we're deciding what are we going to do, like the voice that should determine how you elevate that coverage is the person that has experience in that community. They're the ones that should be saying, actually, I don't think we need to go there. And chances are that if you're a local reporter, like the last thing you're going to do is call another, like a national reporter who's been a local reporter, call Bianca and be like, hey, can you give me the, nobody's going to do that unless, it is so disrespectful. It is so disrespectful. I understand that we're all, chasing the story, but we have to be, there's sportsmanship, you know what I mean? Like there's some ethics to that. And I think that when people do that, you miss the mark, right? And so one of the things that I did like about Gannett is that, they deployed their local newspaper, their closest local newspaper. So in this case, it was like the Palm Beach Post. Those are the reporters that have been sort of, joining the team, and sort of looking for ways to tell this story nationally, but always anchoring it in the people that are close and that would have situational knowledge and that would have connections and that would know where to look, So.
When I worked in local news longer than I have been at the network so far, so I understand that kind of mentality of, well, here they come bigfooting us. But I will say that in this particular situation, and we have such great journalists at our CBS Miami affiliate, that we did finally hit this kind of like cool, what's the word I'm looking for here? A wavelength of sharing information. So they would break an angle and they say, here you go, this is the information we have. Oh, and we got this interview with a rescuer that they really want, so we're going to feed that over to you guys. So there is the ability to work together, and I do think that that's something that networks, affiliates, when it comes to TV or when it comes to, you're talking about local print reporters, a conversation to be had about being respectful of each other, because at the end of the day, for local reporters, this happened in your hometown. You're not going to be able to parachute back home.
And Manny, I saw that you guys did this. I remember sort of like looking through Twitter, you guys did this special, and it was a joint special.
Yep.
And it was so awesome. Like when I saw it, I was like, see guys, like this is the power of collaboration, that then it magnifies. It's not, the local strapped for resources in order, because when they're going to dedicate all these resources to this story, it means that they're not going to dedicate these resources to another thing that's happening in the community. Like it's that kind of like live or die. And these are like really hard decisions. But when you see that those collaborations, that we're all on one team and that the local team and the national team work together, it elevates the quality of the storytelling. And at the end, as I always say, like I work for the people. I don't work for my bosses. I work for the readers. I work for the viewers. I work for the audience.
Speaking of audience, we do have another question from Arelis Hernandez. When the news quiets, when you're at home or among people, when you're trying to get deep into yourself for healing and notice that something doesn't seem quite right, compassion fatigue, empathy gaps, or irritation, at what point do you start to worry?
That is a really heavy question. While I was covering in the first days of Surfside, I remember that I asked my editors if I could just take a few days off from talking to the families directly and instead cover the press briefings with officials, because even though it is the same tragedy, there is a huge difference between listening to families and listening to officials. And I had a friend who had been in town actually for the July 4th weekend. And I just remember we met up for dinner and I saw her and I just broke down in tears. And I just hugged her and I had no explanation. I couldn't even talk because I was sobbing. And I just didn't even understand what was happening. And, you know, I was completely fine right before that. And there was nothing that prompted it. And, you know, that day at night, I really just felt like I needed to have a conversation with myself about, you know, what was happening and what I was really feeling about what I had just experienced the past several days. And that I really just needed to be hugged. Like I needed to feel some compassion from someone close to me. And I think at that point, I guess I kind of worried because I felt like I didn't know, and I didn't check in with myself to kind of figure out if I was okay. I didn't ask myself if I was okay. And I think that that's something that going forward, I'm trying to be really conscious of. You know, everyone the first few days bombarded me with messages like, are you okay? What can I do for you? Like, here's $5 so that you can get a drink, or like, you know, there was all this support for my friends who knew what I was going through, but I didn't really check in with myself. And I was kind of trying to answer messages and saying like, I'm okay, but thank you, and all this stuff. And honestly, I think I spent a lot of time answering messages, like more than I should have. And I should have spent more time really asking myself, like, what do I need right now? So, you know, I think like your body knows, like your body will let you know, like this is enough. Like this is more than you can take. And having automatic reactions, like just sobbing and crying with no real prompt. And I had another moment like that. There was a family member who lost his brother and his sister-in-law and his niece. And they had been here getting the COVID-19 vaccine from Colombia. And that story just really wrecked me because I have loved ones in Latin America who had not been able to get the COVID-19 vaccine. And just knowing that, you know, they were finally able to travel here to get a life-saving vaccine after the year that we've had and just lost them overnight. I was so angry and I was so mad. And I still am, because I think that's so incomprehensible. And yeah, I mean, I think that for the most part, you can't explain any of this. So just really checking in with yourself as much as possible.
Am I allowed to curse? I know that this is a recorded session. It's purposeful. So I was taught that the word fine needs to be completely removed from our vocabulary, that fine is an acronym for fucked up, irrational, neurotic, and emotional. So, and that's what we tend to say. I'm fine. We don't even say, okay, we're like, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. And, you know, one of the four are going to get you at some point, right? And so I would say like, suspend judgment, like literally suspend judgment. It doesn't matter why you're crying. It doesn't matter, you know, like some of it is a cathartic release because, you know, you've been taking on a lot. Another one is, you know, it could be that you're hurting and it's okay. I think like if we were to suspend value judgments and actually just answer a question, like, with an actual feeling or a thought or a, you know, to be precise, right? Like I would encourage us to try to be precise in our language. I think that would give us, like, it would signal to other people, and it would also signal to ourselves that like we might need something. And, you know, not make it it doesn't have to be apocalyptic, right? Like just because you're having an emotion doesn't mean that like everything is wrong or that you're wrong, you know. And we tend to get onto these trains. So like literally like, like suspend fine. Nobody's fine. Nobody's ever fine. And so that would be sort of my tip.
I am the worst offender of I'm fine. And I realize that about myself, and I need to be better about it. It's interesting you put it that way, because it's the throwaway, I'm fine, I'll get through it, right? I think for me, it's my interactions with other people. If I come home and I notice myself being short or have a temper around my partner or a friend who's just wanting to hang out, that's when I realize like, uh-oh, I'm displacing this, I'm taking this out on somebody else. And that's where you need to take a step back. And I think, not to stereotype our community, but I think also as an immigrant and growing up in a Hispanic household, we never really talked about emotions, right? You just soldiered on. Dad goes to work, mom goes to work, you know, and you don't want to rock the boat. But I think we're learning more and more that it's not rocking the boat to just share an emotion and take care of yourself. We have 5 minutes left. So are there any other things, Bianca or Romy, that you would like to share with the group before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to say something that I meant to say earlier on, but you know, something that I think kind of adds to the pressures and the already traumatic work that we've been doing is lack of, you know, institutional support from the organizations that we work in. And I think that, you know, that can be expressed in a number of ways, right? But for example, you know, having women constantly be doing kind of the empathy work, right? And having men doing sort of, you know, more records work or more, you know, investigative work. And kind of, you know, rotating the same reporters doing that traumatic work, as opposed to, you know, giving people more breaks. The fact that, you know, having lunch for people, having water for people, you know, having those immediate basic things available for reporters who are covering these events, just those sorts of things that might seem really small, really take a toll. So I think speaking up has been really helpful for me and my mental health. Being able to vocalize and explain what it is that I need in the moment to my superiors has been really helpful. And, you know, those are empowering things that you can do while you're covering mass tragedies, to really feel that, you know, there is something you can do about the work that you're doing. So I do think that you know, newsrooms have a long way to go when it comes to mental health. I think that this is not something that, you know, we don't bring in a specialist on the day of the tragedy and then move on, right? Like this is something that you will carry for the rest of your life. Probably will leave the organization, will leave, you know, the job that you have, go on somewhere else, but you will always have that. You will always carry that with you. And that's why you need to take care of yourself and explain what you need and make sure that you're getting it in some way. And if not, you know, like setting those boundaries and saying when, you know, like I really cannot do this anymore. I used to, right before the Surfside collapse, I was covering mass shootings and, you know, talking to families, victims of mass shootings. And then Surfside happened. And now then the Haitian president was assassinated, and there were some links to South Florida. Then Cuba began with massive protests. So the amount and just the sheer amount of tragedy that our community has been hit for the past several months is just enormous. It's hard to process, honestly. I don't think that we ever got a transition between each event. So you know, those sorts of things, I guess, help in the immediate short term.
Yeah. Less than 2 minutes left for us. Romy, I'll give you a chance to do some closing thoughts.
I'm gonna add to ping back to you and to Bianca. And COVID isn't over for us, right? Like
No.
COVID for Latino communities has not, like, we look at this Delta strain, it's hitting our families. I lost 2 people in my family to COVID, and people are still anti-vaxxers in my family, and yet I'm here, like, I'm covering this. And also, back in Latin America, like our home countries are being completely like leveraged, so that also weighs. Like, the stories don't stop for us, and we need to know that. So I would say, like, you're covering a disaster, and I'm sure Bianca took a shower every day. Manny, I'm sure you came home and you took a shower, and you would take a shower before you went out, and you would come home. So you can't stay clean today on yesterday's shower. Your mental health, you can't stay like mentally okay thinking that mental health is a thing you're going to do once every 2 weeks. So whatever the equivalent of that mental shower is, you have to take one every single day.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for what you do, you, Bianca, and Romy, and everybody who has been listening in on this panel, and for the questions. I think at the end of the day, what I'm hearing here is passion and heart. It's just taking care of yourself along the way that is also very important in this reporting. So I want to thank you again for joining us. And I do want to let people know that if you missed this and want to go back and listen to it, the recorded version will be uploaded to the convention platform. So thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Ciao. Bye-bye.